Welcome back to this special edition of Cattleman to Cattleman as we discuss beef on dairy and what it means for beef cattle producers. My understanding is that there has been a change in value, as we discussed, on these beef on dairy cross calves versus the Holstein or Jersey calves traditionally. Dr. Jim, I mean, what is that value? How does that value compare to native beef calves?
Well, if you start at the day old and look at the spread in price of day olds between a Holstein bull calf and the crosses,
yes,
depending on, of course, many market factors, it can be in the range of $200 to $300 per head as a day old. As a day old. So it's a reflection of the improved carcass traits, the improved feed efficiency, and the improved gain, right? You impute all of those together, right? And it produces a pretty significant difference in cost of production and also in selling price of the animal.
And what about the comparison between that beef on dairy versus a native beef calf?
Well, I think we can look at there's some data starting to appear there. Yeah. And if you can believe it at times, right, as this thing evolves, those spreads at 300 and 400 pounds have been remarkably close. Now, they shouldn't be that close, yeah, but it's just a function of an evolving market where I would submit that the B&D calves have been overvalued, right, at various points in time. But, typically that spread you would have better data on that, but looking at it, but I'd say over the last while, that 400 pounds is between a $25 and $35 spread. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's exactly what we were looking at as well. At that 4 and 5 weight, maybe $50 a head.
Yeah, and so again, my opinion is I still think that's too much. It's not enough, actually. The spread's not enough.
The spread's not
wide enough. As people get more experience in feeding the cattle, and it's a function of we're overvaluing every feeder animal on the planet at this point in time.
To fill some feed yards,
right? To fill a feed yard, yes. So it's just a relative thing. But there's no question that fundamentally they have more value than the straight Holstein. Yeah. But they should not have as much value as the straight beef cattle. Right? I mean,
just they're different animals. And I'd ask you, Patrick, relative to the behavioral change that's created for dairy producers, it's kind of changed their game in terms of how many replacement females are keeping, has it not?
It's changed the math quite a bit on the replacement heifer system. And especially if you jump back to 2022 and early 2023 when milk margins were struggling, as we said, that incentive to produce that cross calf, I think, resulted in some breeding decisions where they maybe overshot the runway on breeding, adjusting too much of the herd to a beef dairy cross and didn't produce enough replacements. So where we're left today is a replacement heifer shortage on the dairy side. And so ironically, as you look down the road, we may actually tighten up this beef on dairy supply by a small degree as we just try to produce a few more replacements to stabilize that dairy herd. No, to be fair, it's not like the beef on dairy trend is going away, right. But could we tighten it up a few head? I think that's probably an expectation that we'd have.
Yeah. Ryan, I'm curious, what's different? What are some of the challenges and issues feeding these beef on dairy calves versus the native cattle?
Certainly, Kevin. When we first started seeing these beef on dairy crosses hit in the market, in the feeder calf market, in a bigger volume setting, I think we kind of thought, well, this is a beef animal because it's maybe a solid color and has beef genetics. It's a beef on dairy, and so maybe that's where our head went. Or is it, it's coming from a dairy origin, right? From a dairy or a calf ranch to the feed yard, and so what bucket are we going to try to put them in from a cattle feeding perspective? As complex as feed yards can be, we really want to try to keep them as simple as possible. And so when I think we first got started, we're trying to decide, what's going to be the easiest way to start these cattle on feed? What's going to be the best way to acclimate them to a feed yard? How are we going to process them into the system and get them, inoculated and tagged and everything coming through? And what we quickly found was it's not going to be that simple. They're going to carve out kind of their own little spot where they need to be in terms of how we transition on feed. What types of methods or animal handling techniques are going to be best, because these animals may never have seen a person on a horse try to push them up and down the feed alley and get them from a processing barn to a home pen. And so it's been a little bit different approach in if you're a feed yard that's maybe fed a lot of dairy animals already, then it's probably an easier transition for you naturally, right? But if you've only had straight native beef cattle in your feed yard and now have a pen of beef on dairy cattle, that's something that maybe you have to try to really adjust to, right?
Anything you'd add? Dr.
Not really. I think he's covered it
all.
very well. I mean, you've created a separate management class within the feed yard, and over time we adapt to, they're kind of halfway between, right? Characteristics of the Holstein, characteristics of the beef cattle behaviorally, right? And as was mentioned, if you've not fed any Holstein cattle previously and now you're in the B&D thing, then your learning curve is fairly steep, right? But if you've had Holstein cattle before, then not nearly as bad.
Gotcha.